If we look back over the parshiot of the last few weeks, we see a clear sequence. We had, of course, with Shemot, the story of the enslavement of the Jewish people and their subsequent redemption. Following that, we have, of course, the splitting of the Red Sea. Their redemption is complete. Then we have the purpose of this whole redemptive process, which was to receive the Torah, as Hashem told Moshe, "Let my people go that they may serve me on this mountain." So they get the divine law, this most defining and revolutionary moment, which is really the birth of our nation and the sealing of the covenant between God and the Jewish people. Right after that, we have Ve'elu HaMishpatim, and these are the precepts, as was explained in last week's explanation, that we right away continue after this great godly revelation with seemingly utilitarian concepts to remind us that these two are from Sinai. They must be kept because of their divine origin. And we also should try to identify with the reasoning behind them, hence exemplifying this process of trying to internalize Torah and making it something which is our own. And now we come to something which has to do with implementing the Torah in the physical world, and that is the parshah of Terumah. So after having a variety of different commandments, we actually come to something which says, what are we going to do in the physical world? And indeed, the parshah of Terumah, while ostensibly teaching us how to build the tabernacle, what is called the Mishkan, this portable structure which was used for divine service and offerings in the desert, and eventually the same concept was duplicated when they arrived in Canaan, in Israel, with the building of the temple, the first temple and second temple in Jerusalem. And these instructions are given in a series of parshiot, beginning this week and continuing for several more weeks, with no less than 13 chapters being devoted to the construction of the tabernacle, the collection of materials, everything that is needed to make it possible. More chapters, in fact, than we have for the creation of the world, or even the giving of the Torah, or for that matter, the exodus of the children of Israel. So clearly this is a very fundamental concept. And naturally, we will want to find a way to apply this in our lives in a perpetual fashion, even as we see now in our times that the temple does not exist. And we will try to bring this to a variety of levels, beginning with the theme which is highlighted in the JLI course, which is the small temple, the Mikdash Ma'at, which is the synagogue. In a sense, what has happened is this incredible fire of godliness, which was the temple of Jerusalem, in the process of diaspora became many, many small sparks all over the world. And we will see that these are actually intimately connected to the original idea of the temple in Jerusalem as well. What is interesting, however, is that with all the discussion of the variety of materials that are used in constructing the tabernacle, how they should be used, what the dimensions of the tabernacle were, how each of the vessels should be made, most notably the menorah, the candelabra, the shulchan, the table, which was near the Holy Ark itself, and so on. And indeed, it was a very elaborate and beautiful construction, using materials from all categories of creation, inanimate such as gold and silver, vegetative, because of course it was used, wood was used for it. Even the animal kingdom was used because wool from sheep was used for the textiles and so on. And so the idea was to incorporate all aspects of the physical world and to devote them to building a home for God, whatever that means, and let's come back to that in a minute. And indeed, God says to the Jewish people, "V'asule mikdash, make for me a sanctified place. V'shachanti b'tocham, I shall dwell amongst them." And right away, to bring it right into a kind of perpetual relevance, we have the commentary of the Shalol Shnei Luchot HaBrit, a great commentator and a mystic and a legal scholar as well. And he points out the grammatical irregularity, which is, it says, "I shall build for me a holy place and I shall dwell in them." It should have said, "I will dwell in it." And of course he says that in actual fact the indwelling of the divine presence that occurs through the process of building the temple and everything that is connected with that spiritually does not only cause a dwelling of the divine presence in the structure of the temple, but actually in every single individual. And indeed, even when the temple does not exist, our lives become that temple in a number of different respects. And so, this is actually the parshah which zeroes in after we receive the commandments of the Torah, many of the commandments of the Torah, telling us what the purpose of the commandments are. And indeed, this is the purpose of creation itself. As we have emphasized many times, the revolutionary accomplishment of Torah was that it enabled us, with the divine given capacity, to do what would be seemingly impossible, which is to fuse together these seemingly paradoxical elements of material and spiritual. And so therefore the first mitzvah that they are given, in a sense as a nation, according to the commentaries, the mitzvah of building the Mishkan was given right after the second tablets were given to the Jewish people, was in effect embodying the very purpose of the Torah, to imbue the material universe and to transform it into a place where the divine presence can dwell openly. And this brings us to the various reasons that are given for the creation of the world, and indeed a variety of them are given, whether they are ethical reasons, mystical reasons, and each one addresses a different aspect. We know that God is not lacking anything. Why create a world? And so the Arizal, Yitzchak Luria, explains that indeed God is lacking nothing, but because God's essential nature is good, and it is the nature of good to do good, therefore, in order for there to be a recipient of divine bounty, of divine goodness, there needed to be a world. The Zohar itself says that because God was the only existence, so the world was created in order that there be a seemingly other entity which would then come to recognize God. And the author of the Tanya, Shneur Zalman of Liadi, offers a different explanation. Indeed, all the explanations are not purely original, but based on authentic primary sources. So the Alter Rebbe, as he is called, the author of the Tanya, zooms in on a quotation from the Midrash, which says that God desired, nitava means he had a desire, that there be from a dwelling place in the lower worlds. Dira b'tachtonim, it was mentioned in last week's lecture as well. Dira, even in modern Hebrew, is used to mean an apartment. So now we are coming close indeed to the idea of this week's parshah, which is the idea of a home for God. We must not forget God is everywhere. He's omnipresent. Indeed, his existence by definition defies the whole idea of being present somewhere. It totally transcends time and space. And yet, because we are physical material beings, the idea was, as part of this process of trying to reveal godliness in the material creation, which masks it, so the idea was to have one location which is more sanctified, and to exemplify this whole process with one house, This is the Beit Mikdash. And so, on the one hand, we have this idea that Hashem says that He wants there to be a lower world, a world which in some ways contradicts the idea of divine revelation, and the challenge being to reveal the true purpose of creation, to reveal the true godly nature of creation by using the physical objects in creation as instruments for carrying out the divine will.